Hi, I'm Melissa Smith.
I'm Spencer Ziegler, and welcome to Data Lit, a podcast for educators by educators. So we're at the start of another Data Lit season.
Yep.
And also at the start of a new school year. Well, apart from our year-round schools, for whom, summer does not exist. But yeah, when this is airing. So we thought this might be a good time to kind of reflect back on data literacy over the years in Wake County. And to do that, we're thrilled to be joined by Brad McMillen, Assistant Superintendent for Data Research and Accountability, to kind of chat with us about this. Brad, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So Brad, do you mind telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and your path to becoming an Assistant Superintendent?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So in my earliest part of my career, I worked at the Department of Public Instruction in downtown Raleigh at the state level. Worked in what was called their testing and accountability division back when No Child Left Behind was being birthed at the federal level. So I got to work on that process at the state level a bit in the late 90s and early 2000s. Spent a number of years there working on policy research for the State Board of Education and for the General Assembly, and learned a lot about the bureaucracy of the education system in the state and how it worked and how LEAs interacted with the state. And then after a number of years there, came to Wake County as a data analyst in what was called our Evaluation and Research Department, and have been here ever since. And currently Assistant Superintendent for the department, and have been in that position for a little over 10 years.
Hard to believe it's been that long already.
I know.
So for our listeners, would you mind sharing what does an Assistant Superintendent for Data Research and Accountability do?
Oh, well, our department has basically three core functions that I sort of help make happen. The big one, the main one, is the administration of all of our state and federal tests that we have to give. So EOGs, EOCs, the ACT for our high school juniors, the NAEP test when that comes around every couple of years, the access test that we give to our multilingual learner students. And so we have a unit within our department that coordinates that whole process and makes sure that it gets done on time and in a standardized fashion, and that we assess all the students we're supposed to assess. Then we have another portion of our department which focuses on the analysis and the reporting of all of that information for our schools, for the general public, for the board, and for all of our internal stakeholders that we work with and all of the other departments here in central services. And then a third area of our department does mostly program and policy research, using a lot of that data to be able to monitor different policies that the district has in place or different programs that the district makes investments in, to make sure that those policies and those programs are having the impact on our students and teachers that we want them to have, and that they're doing so in a way that's cost effective and efficient and driving the kinds of outcomes that we hope to see for our kids.
So since working in WCPSS, what has been some of the biggest changes you've noticed when it comes to how we gather, analyze, and maybe act on data?
Good question. Well, obviously, in the last almost 20 years that I've been here in the department in various roles, the technology to do that kind of work has changed quite a bit, right? Data are a little more accessible and available now than they were 15 or so years ago. Things turn around a little bit more rapidly. Things are, you can find things now on your phone in 10 seconds that before, maybe you had to wait until a department produced a report and printed copies and delivered them to you in a notebook in order to have that kind of information.
Yeah.
So our ability to collect and distribute that information has really ramped up quite a bit. Maybe not to the level that we really want to see it at. There's probably some room for growth there, but that has changed a lot over the last 10 to 15 years. I'd say another thing that's changed a lot too is sort of our appetite for data. When I started working here, our department being the one that does all the state and federal testing reporting, sometimes it felt like those were kind of the only data that people looked at. It would come out once a year and we'd see how many kids were proficient in these different schools and, how many kids were graduating from high school on time. And that was the main focus of everything. But I think now we've become a little bit more of a data invested culture as an organization. And now our human resources department is looking at data more often about how long are positions staying vacant? Where are the vacancies most persistent in our district? How rapidly are we able to fill them? Those kinds of things. Even in our operational side of the house, we're looking at data in a lot of ways I think that maybe we didn't used to 10, 15 years ago, about how long it takes to fulfill maintenance requests, how often buses are on time, and how often we have to have substitute bus drivers and things like that, and being able to look at some of that information in a way that helps them do their work better, as opposed to just relying on things like student test scores and having that be the driver of all of the work that we do. Because for some areas of the organization, I think it's hard to connect themselves to that information.
Right.
And so what I see now is a lot of the departments that are not necessarily responsible for educating students on a daily basis, looking at their own data, looking at their own ways to improve their processes. So it's becoming a little bit more of I think, a widespread culture of looking at the data that you have in the area of the organization where you work and say, what is this telling me about what's going well? And what is this telling me about ways where I might be able to make improvements or become more efficient or become more effective at what I do?
Do you think our department has been instrumental in bridging those different departments and the way our data culture has changed?
Well, I don't know that you can attribute it all to us. I think, I'd like to think we have some small part in that because that's part of what we preach all the time with the work that we do, right? And when we interact with our colleagues, we provide them with a lot of resources and support around, if I want to know if this thing that I'm doing is working, how do I know? Just as one example, several years ago when Rollsville High School opened, it opened with a really unique design for a high school that we had not had before. We used a really kind of innovative model at the time that encouraged all of these sort of collaborative spaces where students could work. The building was multiple stories, and the way that it was structured, there were cafeterias on all 4 levels rather than a singular cafeteria.
Interesting.
For all kids to attend to. And the design of the school was intended to sort of encourage more student interaction, more time and space for kids to work collaboratively rather than just sitting in desks and rows in hundreds of classrooms all day long. And our facilities folks came to us and said, is there a way for us to know whether this type of a design of a school is really more impactful and effective?
Yeah.
Is it encouraging kids to work more in groups? Is it making it easier for teachers to assign projects to kids rather than sort of the sage on the stage didactic type of teaching that, sometimes we feel is kind of limiting in terms of what it can do? So I think we have played a role in being able to, work with groups around the central office like that to help them think about those things in some of those ways. But I think a lot of it's just been driven by just the necessity of everybody needing to document what they do that's impactful and what it's not. I think it's been more of a cultural shift. I would like to think that, our folks have done some work to support that because that's kind of the world that we live in all the time. And I hope that, it continues to kind of go in that direction because I think even though we've made a lot of strides in that area, we've got a lot of places where we could still make improvements as well.
So when you think about it, are there things that you're grateful that you've seen that has stayed the same?
Yeah, I would say one of the things that's made the most difference is support from leadership at the top of the organization for making sure that data are at the front and center of decisions that we make, whether those decisions are happening in the Child and Nutrition Services Department or whether they're happening in our area of academics or whether they're even happening among our individual schools sometimes when they're deciding what kinds of resources they need to have in their building to help support student learning. If you think about all of the educational technology tools that are out there that schools are wanting to use to help kids learn math or reading or science or other skills, there's just such a huge amount of those things out there, and trying to decide which of these things are best for my kids, just having an eye on those kinds of things and helping people think through, how do I make a decision about which supplementary resource is best for my kids in my building? And then once I get it, how do I know that it worked? And, just making sure that those questions are getting asked and that we're trying to provide those answers so that we can make those kinds of smart decisions, on the procurement side, again, whether it's an academic resource, whether it's something in student support services that's helping kids, navigate their way through high school on the way to post-secondary, whatever, because we just have so many of those things operating in a district this large on so many levels all the time. And just trying to bring that lens to it all the time about, is it working? How do we know that it's working? And if it's not, how do we need to adjust?
Yeah, I think it's important to have supportive leadership and leadership that's visionary to kind of see, yes, this is important so that we can continue doing the things that we do.
Yeah, and it makes me think of just that transition from when we used to be the keepers of the data, and it was primarily a communication skill, just this one-way street to hand over data, where it's become much more collaborative and connecting. And I think that might apply onto the school level perhaps as well, that, be it building leaders when they're thinking about their staff, or perhaps even teachers when they're thinking about their students' data. That's not just hand over data, just give research. It's trying to communicate and collaborate to figure out what are the applications so we can get the end goal that we want. Yeah. Now, for those school-based listeners who are striving to become more data lit and assessment lit, what's a piece of advice that you might offer them as they head into this new school year?
We're about to come to the time where those kind of traditional school-based evaluative numbers are all going to show up in the newspaper, right? Our end of grade scores, our end of course scores, our graduation rate, right around Labor Day every year is kind of the annual unveiling of that happens across the entire state for all of our districts. And it also coincides with the kickoff of a new school year for at least our traditional calendar colleagues, even though, as you said, our year-round folks are pretty well into it already. I think one of the things that I like to remind people of at this time of year is that all of this information that's about to get released that sort of gives us the rundown on what happened in 24, 25 is helpful, and it tells us lots of things, right? It tells us places where, things are moving in the right direction. It helps highlight pockets of excellence that we can try and learn from in terms of, here's a school that did really well in this particular area. What can we learn from them that maybe can help spread to other schools? And it can also highlight, obviously, places where we still have work to do. But those data are not all of the data that we need to do our job, right? They're very high level. Sometimes I refer to them as sort of mile wide, inch deep pieces of information. And I think, it's good to remind yourself when all this stuff is out there and it's the talk of everything for, the window of time for which it's available, is that we have lots of other data that are important to our jobs that we need to remember to look at too, right? Everything that we collect in schools from students with our eyes and our ears is a form of data, right? Teachers working with kids individually or in small groups, that data is always coming into us about what is this child struggling with? What is the misconception here that seems to be persistent, and how do I go about getting rid of it? What kind of insight did this student just have, that shows me that he or she is now beyond where I thought they were with this particular skill or this particular standard? Sometimes the kind of that micro data that you collect in the classroom, student work, even conversations with parents or even other teachers that are working with a student you're working with to say, what are you seeing from him when he's in math class? Because this is what I'm seeing during our literacy block. And is it the same? Is it different? All of that data matters too. And those data answer important questions for us that the high level data that gets reported in the newspaper is not going to be able to ever answer for us, right? Because it's too broad brush and it's not specific enough to give us information about what individual kids need to be able to move themselves forward. And so I think it's a good time to remind people that, that's the data that gets all the headlines in the newspaper, but there's lots of other data that give us that well-rounded picture about what's working and what's not in our classroom, at our grade level, in our school, or in our district. And all of that needs to be looked at collectively because the different decisions that we need to make need different types of information. And they're all equally valuable because they all do different things for us.
Yeah, that piece of just remembering the purpose of each assessment and not overfitting. It makes me think of, we did episodes a few years back on satellite map and street level data. And so you need satellite data, and that allows you to have certain apples to apples comparisons so you can kind of figure out, like you said, those pockets of excellence. But then moving down to the map level to figure out, like on the domain, on the standard level, what you can do next. But then, as you spoke, the street level data, get into those lived experiences of the students, of the teachers, of the community members. That's key. So thank you for elevating that.
Absolutely.
All right. So, Brad, thank you for coming and chatting with us about data in Wake County over the years.
Happy to. Glad to be here and enjoy your podcast and look forward to your next episodes.
Yeah. We have been slowly working our way through the DRA staff. So anyone else in DRA listening, you might be up next. Prepare
Maybe
yourselves.
Brad can tag somebody.
Yeah. Now that he did it, I think there's an implied pressure on everyone else. Yeah. Brad's neither confirming nor denying.
I know.
Just want that. Okay. Thank you to Millbrook High School's Tremont Ponton for the theme music that's new for this season. It's fantastic. And thank you for listeners for tuning in. You can head to www.wcpss.net/datalit to kind of learn more. And you can contact us by sending us an email to datalit@wcpss.net. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.